Welcome to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast, a podcast that brings personal stories from transplant survivors, their families, friends, and loved ones. This is where you will hear challenges and triumphs of everyone involved in this journey. Our guests will offer wisdom, advice, and inspiration on everything you want to know about transplant. My name is Jenny McFarland. I am a transplant survivor, and this is a podcast I wish I had before and immediately following my transplant. Thank you for listening. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast, where you tell your side of the story. My name is Jenny McFarland. I am your host, and if you are listening to this in real time, it is almost March, so it's the end of February, and February is National Heart Month. And so my guest today is all about Heart Month. He is going to share his incredible heart transplant story, and he's a huge inspiration to all transplant recipients out there. So before we dive into that, I just want to mention really quickly that you may or may not know this already, but the podcast has a YouTube channel, and I am a little bit of a latecomer. I only have, a handful of episodes on there because I didn't realize I wasn't posting to YouTube. So there's some episodes on there now, and they'll be on there from here on out. So if you are tired of listening to the podcast via your podcast app or the website, you can always listen to it on YouTube. Sometimes it's nice to have a podcast playing in the background while you're working at your desk or whatever. So you can listen to the podcast on YouTube. Speaking of YouTube, I just want to mention that I need some rating and reviews. I don't really have very many, and I appreciate the ones that I do have. So I need you, if you would please go on to the Apple Podcast platform and leave a rating and review for the podcast. Now, if you don't know how to do that, if you visit our YouTube channel and go to the very first video, my husband was kind enough to make a video of how to post a rating and review using your iPhone. Now, I don't have an iPhone. I'm not an iPhone user. I'm an Android girl. But watching his video, it seems like it's pretty easy. So if you have an iPhone and you want to know how to leave a rating and review, please go on YouTube and watch the first video, and it'll show you how to do it. Rating and reviews help the podcast grow. It helps people find it easier. And, there's not a ton of transplant-related podcasts out there. There are some pretty great ones. And so when you leave rating and reviews for these podcasts, when people go searching for something, then it pops up and it's easier to find. So I just wanted to ask if you would kindly do that for me. And also, if you want to leave me a suggestion or a comment, or you want to be on the show, you can go to my website at www.pretopostTX.com, and there's a contact page, and you can leave a message on that page, and it goes directly to me. So with all of that, I feel like I'm rambling, so I'm going to just stop rambling and go ahead and dive into my guest's story because it's so incredible. So I hope that you guys love this episode as much as I do, and I know you guys are going to find it super inspirational. So let's get to it. Let's welcome my guest, John Downs. Hi, John. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad that you're here.
Hi, Jenny. It's great to be here. It's really good to be here.
Great. So let me ask you, when you had your transplant, why you needed a transplant, and where you had your transplant.
Well, I had a heart transplant in May 1989, and I had it at St. Luke's Episcopal Hospital in Houston. The hospital's changed names a couple of times, and
Yeah.
owners.
Yeah. Well, that's where I had my transplant, so that's pretty cool. Um, so 1989, that's crazy. That's so long
Yeah.
ago. That's
Well,
I was 10 years old when you had your transplant. So that's pretty cool. That's something you
yeah,
should be proud of.
we were expecting our second child when we found out I needed the transplant, and so
Oh wow.
you know
Okay,
I
so
have
what go
he
ahead.
he is he is 33 now,
Uh-huh.
and he has a son of his own,
Okay.
and so he's never known me prior to having the heart transplant, and he's expressed over years and times when I've become ill, unexpected illnesses because of the immunosuppressants or whatever reason. He's expressed a lot of anxiety about that, and I don't think he was ever really able to express that to my wife and I um, until in the last few years when he was an adult and I was I don't remember exactly what the instance was, but something was coming up, and he would just his tone and his attitude and his changed a lot. And we talked, and he's an adult, and he finally admitted that he doesn't like listening to all my transplant stories. He doesn't
He
like it
doesn't. Wow.
because he hasn't known me since then. He was always afraid that that I was going to die. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Wow.
it's been hard, and the trauma that my family has gone through over the years for a very long time. And I never being the patient and the one that's going through it all directly, I've never realized how traumatic it is for my wife and my sons and my brothers and sisters and my parents when they were alive. It's
Hmm.
just you know transplant is a one of the transplant coordinators said to me prior to my transplant that it's a very selfish illness and I have to care for myself or I won't be here for anybody else.
Right.
And I was 28 at that point in my life, and it was I was healthy. I was um, I played racquetball on February 28th, 1989, and I started to develop a cough, and the cough got a little bit worse, and then on March 15th, I coughed up a bunch of blood, and I went to our family doctor, and he did a chest X-ray in his office, and he said you have pneumonia, but it might be something else, and he sent me to a hospital in West Houston, and um, they did some tests, and 2 days later, they put me in an ambulance and sent me to St. Luke's, and I met Dr. Masson on Friday evening, and he did a heart catheterization and a biopsy, and came in my room on Saturday morning and said I had idiopathic cardiomyopathy. And I'm like, well, what is that? And he said it's an end stage heart disease. And I said, well, what do you mean by end stage? And he said that I'll be dead in 3 to 4 months unless I get a heart transplant. Yeah, and that was completely not in the cards for my life at that point in time.
Yeah.
It was an a gigantic. I hit a brick wall basically, and I had been working as a chef, and I'd started to take some classes at Houston Community College to try to learn the business management side of running a restaurant because I was trying to open my own restaurant, and that was my goal and my plan. And all that has been gone. So you change, and there was living the day to day, and even the hour by hour, during the waiting period, and
Hmm. How long were you on the waiting list before they called you?
it was very very short period of time. Um, they did the workup and they sent me home from the hospital on March 29th, and a blood clot passed in my lung that evening. I was back in the hospital for 10 days, and they presented me to the review board that determined if I was a candidate for a transplant or not, or discuss. And they said yes. So I was actually on the list they had to get the insurance approval, and then I was actually on the waiting list for. I was put on early April, April 8th or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and I was called on May 7th in the evening. I was actually at home, but it was really really bad day that day, and to where I had energy to get up and use the bathroom and then go sit down. That was all I could do. And
Yeah. So you had your transplant. How did it go? Like how'd the surgery go?
uh, I was on so much blood thinner that I bled out quite a bit, and they told me that they used like 28 units of blood during the surgery, and then all the plasma they gave to me afterwards. But because I had so much, my blood was so thin, they took me out of the surgery, and my wife came in and saw me, and I looked good and healthy, or better, and they told her to go home. I went into surgery at 3 a.m. and so it
Mhm.
was, I came out at 6:30 or so, and um, they said, told her to go home and rest and try to take some sleep a little bit. And she she left, and then I started to bleed really really badly, and they had to open me up again and try to do the resuturing.
Oh wow.
So the surgery, that I got the double dose of the anesthesia, and um, I first thing I remember was this was um, Sunday night, Monday morning. The first thing I remember conscious was on Wednesday night. So I was like, "What happened to Tuesday?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
and
that happened to me a little bit, not that much, but when I woke up from surgery, so I went in at 11 a.m. and I woke up the next morning at 6. And I thought when my husband said it was like 6, whatever, I thought it was 6 that night. And I learned later that it
yeah,
was the next morning. So
yeah, yeah. It's minor, but it stuck with me. The the loss of time, the loss of you know, of
yeah.
time basically. So so, and then I was in the hospital for 15 days post surgery, and I felt super fantastic. I don't think I ever felt better. When I was still in the ICU, my parents were there, and one of my uncles called, and there wasn't a phone in the ICU, and it was in the corridor near the nurses station. And I hopped out of bed and I walked over there, dragging all these posts. The nurses, I wanted to say hello to my uncle. I'm the nurses. And so they said, "We'll bring the phone to you."
Yeah.
So, you know, um, and then I had a rejection episode 5 weeks post surgery, which that was very very hard to get past. But I think on the day that I had the biopsy for the surgery, I don't think I don't think I'd felt better that day. I
No.
think I felt the best I'd felt in a very long time. And I didn't realize how sick that I actually was prior to the transplant.
Yeah.
But when I came out of the anesthesia, it was I felt great. So, but the rejection, they gave me a 3 gram prednisone pulse, which was almost killed me, and the doctors they realized that pretty soon after they administered it because of how bad I reacted to it.
Hmm.
And they told me I would catch pneumocystis pneumonia almost guaranteed, and I did catch it 10 months later after they'd finished all the Bactrim as the prophylaxis, and from there it I ended up having I developed a sinus infection, which I had to have a surgery on to clean out my sinuses, and it destroyed my hips. I've had my left hip. I had 4 surgeries on my left hip. 3 of them were replacements. I've had
And
my right knee replaced.
all of that was because of the prednisone
Yes.
thing that
Yeah.
they, yeah.
No, I still take prednisone today. And I've
Yeah.
not been able to get off of it.
Whenever you had the bad reaction to the prednisone, what did they do to fix that at that time?
Well, because they could give me such a large dose of it, which at that in the 1980s, that was a fairly standard starting point for rejection, especially for how severe I was in rejection.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then I was in the hospital for 8 days, and then they sent me home. They said because my immune system was so shot at that point in time uh, that they figured that if I stayed in the hospital, I would probably contract some infection that was floating around in the hospital. So they sent me
Yeah.
home, and when I got home, my legs, my calf muscles, both cramped
Mm-hmm.
to. It was one of the greatest pains I think I've ever had was the cramping, and I to where my legs just kind of were pulled up and curled up behind me.
Yeah.
They just contracted. Um, and that lasted on and off for a couple of weeks, and then uh, I our son that was alive at that point in time, he was 2.5 to 3 years old, almost three, and he had been going to a daycare, and we had to pull him out of that because of they said kids are germ they're germ carriers, and they brought all the bacteria and viruses that they're exposed to, and they bring it home with them.
Yeah.
Uh, so, and there
Wow.
was there were some tough times there, but yeah, and mentally the prednisone really messed with me. I hallucinated. I was
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. A lot of people experience that hallucination thing. I never had that problem. Um, I I wanted to have the hallucinations just because I heard so much about it. But then after doing this podcast, I hear a lot of horrible stories of what people hallucinate. So then I'm like, well, I guess maybe I'm the lucky one that I didn't have that. So
my hallucinations were more nightmares than anything.
yeah, that's
So,
yeah, that's what I've heard most people are. So I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining.
yeah.
Yeah.
Besides being able to hear the refrigerator call you from the other room, so John, come here, come here. There's some food here. Come on, you got to eat.
Yeah. Yeah. So all of that was towards the beginning. What about like as the years went by? Did you experience anything like hard or out of the ordinary problems with your heart?
Um, my heart has been the one constantly excellent, strong thing throughout this whole entire journey. Because I've had a large number of biopsies. They did, and the tricuspid valve, which is in the right ventricle, was damaged, and I've had that replaced in 2013.
Okay.
And that's the only. And from there, um, I developed an atrial flutter, and then occasional atrial fibrillation. And with all the other surgeries I've had, the anesthesia, it's caused my heart to go into really bad flutters or
Mm.
fibrillation. So as I wean off of the anesthesia, um, and I did have a cardio ablation done this past October, and
Yeah.
it's great. I don't have this, don't experience it anymore, but
Yeah.
but the heart's been good, except for these. You know, I spoke with my cardiologist about it, and he's when I when I had the tricuspid valve replaced, and I just both kind of agreed that it's an issue that would happen with a long term survivor. Um,
Yeah.
um, Dr. Frazier, the surgeon that did my transplant, he also was in when they did the tricuspid valve replacement. He said that they don't study long term survivors. They study people in their first you
Yeah.
know 5 years to 10 years and then 20 years, but then there's no studies on what the drugs that we take are doing to our bodies.
Right.
Um,
And
so
so, do you know? So you're what, almost 33 years out, right?
almost 34.
Almost
It'll be
34.
34. It'll be 34 in May.
That's amazing. So, do you know what the year, what the number is of the oldest, what the oldest,
Um,
you know what I mean, like the longest heart transplant
I
recipient?
don't know. I don't know. In across the entire transplant population, I'm not sure what that is. I do know that there was one gentleman from St. Luke's who lived for 37 years,
Hmm.
and then he died from prostate cancer. And
Wow.
then there's one other patient who believes she's out for 35 years currently.
Wow.
I don't think I've ever met her, but right now I'm the second longest survivor from St. that's still alive from St.
Yeah.
Luke's.
That's pretty cool title to have. Does that make you like, like if I were you, I'd be going around telling people, the second, longest heart survivor. So,
Well, people, with the other doctors that I've met, and if they're the doctors I see here in Oklahoma, they will introduce me to other of their colleagues
yeah.
and say that I'm the longest survivor ever. It's like when I said, no, 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 I'm not the
Yeah.
longest survivor ever. That's a goal, but I'm
Yes.
you know,
Yeah, that's pretty
but
cool. That's pretty cool.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've thought a number of times over the years, how many people have lived for 30 years and how many are still alive right now, and I would probably guesstimate that there's less than 50
Hmm.
alive more than 30 years, across the entire planet.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of centers didn't do transplants in the 1980s.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so
So what is it like now that you're 30 plus years? Like what is do you still see the doctor monthly? Not monthly, of course not monthly, but like you go yearly? Do you still get your labs at a
well,
specific time?
I do take a blood thinner, and so I have the
Oh, you got to go
proton and
check it
INR done
every
every
week.
month,
Okay.
every month, and then the I still take cyclosporin or Neoro, the microemulsion formulation of the cyclosporin, and it's been doing a lot of damage to my kidneys. And
Mm.
I've been told that eventually I will need a kidney transplant. And it's a matter
Well,
of dollars.
I think a lot of us get
I don't
told
know.
that. I can't imagine like so like I always suspect that eventually I'll get there with the kidneys. But now I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm gonna last 33 years since, John here did. So eventually you might
Yeah,
need a kidney transplant, but I mean, you might not. Look how far you've gone without needing one already. So that's
yeah, yeah. Well, I am currently in stage 4 kidney failure. So
okay.
there's, and it's been progressing, and it was pretty steady in stage 3B for a really long time. And then last year it took a step in the wrong direction. So, and that currently it's in stage 4. So the my nephrologist gave me a drug called Jardiance, which is mainly for diabetes. And it's used as an off-label use, and we've seen an improvement in my kidneys. So
Okay.
I see him every 4 months, and I see my dermatologist every 3 months or so, and I've had uh, lot of uh, minor skin cancer issues over the years, and I imagine
Yeah.
if I had not paid attention to that, it'd be there'd be melanomas by now.
Yeah.
Um, and so I would recommend that anybody who has an organ transplant, um, see your dermatologist regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's pretty common. I have a
yeah,
friend who has to get those removed all the time because they're just popping up. So it's
Yeah.
important. It's important. Especially I think it's worse. It gets worse as you get further out. I think after the first 5 years, they say that it's like super, super important that you get it done because it's more likely to form.
Yeah. Well, when I was a child, my mother would send us outside, and if we were at the beach or wherever, they put copper tone, which is a skin oil, and
Yeah.
I'm pretty fair. I've always been fair skinned,
Mhm.
and I would get burnt,
Yeah.
and that was part of it. And then the immunosuppressants have definitely contributed to my skin sensitivity. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, but I you asked what my routine is with my heart doctors.
Yeah.
I have my annuals basically, and that's so I keep those. It's back on every May. It's slid off that schedule over the years, but right now it's back at every May. I have my annual where I go to Houston and I see my transplant cardiologist, and um, I also see the nephrologist, or the nephrologist here, but I see a hematologist oncologist because I was diagnosed with post transplant lymphoproliferative disease, or PTLD, 10 years post transplant, and uh, the doctor that I see for that, she worked with the transplant program, but she was out of MD Anderson, but she worked in St. Luke's as well with the transplant recipients, and um, she used a monoclonal antibody to to which reversed it. And at that point in time, it was Rituxan, and it had been approved by the FDA for non-Hodgkin's lymphomas just a few months prior to when it was administered to me for the PTLD. And she told me that I'm the longest survivor with PTLD, and with especially with that treatment. And
Yeah.
so, but it's a was like the grandfather of the monoclonal antibodies. Um,
Yeah. Wow.
and so I see her, and um, those are the doctors that I go and see in Houston, and I see the transplant coordinators, and so
Oh,
they do
you still
they
come
do
to
all the
Houston for that. I thought maybe you would have switched over to the doctors over there and where you live now.
uh, uh, the transplant centers here are in Oklahoma City. I live in Norman, which is
Oh,
just south of Oklahoma City.
okay.
No, I considered that. I did consider that. And when we moved back to Oklahoma, we were really, really nervous about leaving the transplant center in Houston because they're so good, and um, they it was a very holistic, a whole body approach, and they treated me as if I was an equal, and it was you know I was a full voting member of the team,
Hmm.
and they when they told me if I had any questions, I didn't understand something, I tell them to explain it in language that I understood. And I did that. And eventually I started to understand all the terminology that was used, and just paying attention and asking questions and taking notes, and
Yeah.
just documenting, things that are happening and what they're discussing. And because, I'm the only one in my body,
Right.
and that when they see me, they get a snapshot of me. And so I have to, if things don't feel right, um, I have to act on them. I don't really want to let them, stew in me and get worse. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. I just moved from Houston to El Paso and now I'm trying to get used to the my transplant team is in another city. So it's gonna take some time, I think, to get used to that. But I was always afraid to move away from my transplant team. And then I started working at this place called Norris Home, where it's a living community for transplant recipients. And working there, I got to see all of these people who would come in and travel, and they lived in different states. And So seeing that and seeing that, they're all doing well and everything's going smoothly, I thought, okay, we can move. So we ended up moving to El Paso. And so now I've got to learn how to communicate with both, my pulmonologist and in El Paso and my transplant team here in Houston. And it's been a little bit of a challenge so far, but I'm confident that it'll work itself out. So
Well, then I don't know if this is advice or what, but when we moved, I we went and talked to the transplant center here in Oklahoma City about moving and would they be willing to follow up with me. And I asked them, you know, primarily for emergency situations because I still wanted to continue to go to Houston for annual checkups and things that we could schedule. And they said yes, of course we would. And then it turned out that they were not communicating things back to Houston, and I part of my criteria was that communication, it's so key. We
yeah,
have to be able to communicate. And now we have the electronic. When you go to the doctor's office and they're looking at their computer, and it doesn't feel like they're looking at you as a patient.
yeah,
When previously they were looking at the patient, and then they would take notes and record their the visit post. So, and I've had some issues with a few doctors over the years who didn't want to communicate anything to the doctors in Houston. And my team here, they every time I go to see them, they communicate immediately the visit to the doctors in Houston. So they have, and it's well documented, I think, on both sides. And if there's concerns, then there are no misses.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's gonna be a challenge for me, but you know, I feel like I'll get it under control, hopefully. So
yeah,
it's just
well,
hard moving
it's
away. You feel a little, I don't want to say unsafe, but I feel like I'm naked now because I don't have my transplant team, hovering over me and taking care of me. So, but
yeah,
that's life.
yeah, yeah.
So
I that's a good analogy. I use it as a that I thought that they were a crutch that I was using
yeah,
to get through daily activities. And as I got further and further out from transplant, things definitely got so much better over time. And it took me two and a half years to actually start to feel like a normal person
yeah,
before. But that was, the drugs are hard on your body, the changes, work having had worked as a chef and had rejection, and then the surgery on my sinuses. My wife said, you have to change careers. Because I tried to go back to work in the hotel that I was working at in Houston, and I just kept getting sick. I'd go to work, and 2 hours later, I'd be coughing or hacking, and I
yeah,
would end up in the hospital. And it was just so, probably because of and I think because of the rejection and how hard the reversing that was on my body. You
yeah,
know,
yeah. You said you changed your career. What did you change it to, if you don't mind me asking?
um, well, we moved here and we chose to live in Norman. My wife was able to move with her employer, which was the federal government, um, to an office here in Oklahoma City, and we settled here in Norman because the University of Oklahoma is here. So I could go back to school and I could retrain. So I got a degree in environmental science, from
Okay.
being a chef to environmental science, and minor in chemistry.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I worked in the air medium. My most recent employer, we supply the emissions monitoring equipment at power plants and refineries. And actually, the turbines that are right behind the medical center, that's one of our customers.
Wow.
Well, but we monitor and measure. We integrate the analyzers and the software to so they can stay in compliance with the air regulations for the EPA and the state.
Yeah.
We have international installation base, and I was the environmental manager. And when I started working for this company, the office was based in the Philadelphia area, and I I stayed here and worked at home, so it was great. I didn't get sick. I was at home by myself, but
Yeah.
yeah, and I was the environmental manager for the company, and it was just used every skill set I could possibly imagine ever having,
Yeah.
from software programming to the engineering side of it to the understanding the rules and regulations, to making comments on codes, to working with the customers directly.
Yeah.
So,
That's definitely a lot different than being a chef. So
yeah, it is.
very interesting. Okay. Well, I have one more question for you, but I want to give you an opportunity to add anything if you have anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to talk about.
Um, no, the whole entire transplant experience has been really, really good, and I can't imagine myself without it at this point in time. I've had
Yeah.
my transplanted heart longer than I had my heart I was born with,
Yeah.
uh, and my I'm so grateful for my donor and his family. Uh, I don't know anything about him other than the single letter that we received from his mother.
Hmm.
Life gift. She wrote the letter. I was transplanted in May, and she wrote the letter in early July. And Life Gift informed me that they had it uh, in September, and they asked me if I wanted it, and I said yes, of course. And they said we're going to hold on to it. They gave it to me the following September, and she had her name signed on it, but they blanked it out with a black marker. And in the letter, she describes her son as she said, I must have gained a lot of weight after the transplant because I'm carrying his heart of gold. And
Oh,
he he passed away on May 7th, 1989, and I honor that day as his day, and May 8th as the celebration for my transplant,
yeah.
which is a convenient thing, but it brings tears to me every time I read the letter, and it's such a beautiful letter, and it's the only communication we've had from her. Written to her several times. Um, Life Gift has lost her contact information at this point in time,
Mm,
which is sad. It's no fault of their own. But they moved offices, and they also moved everything to electronic, and they searched for her contact information for several weeks in 2020, and they were not able to find anything. So but I every morning when I take my medicine, I I think of him,
mm,
and I thank him for this,
yeah.
for allowing me to continue on with my life. And I feel like I'm a very, very, very blessed and lucky person. And
Yeah.
I just I'm so grateful. So,
Yeah. For sure.
you know,
Okay. Well, my last question for you is if you had a piece of advice that you wish that you had before your transplant that you could give to somebody, what would it be?
uh, don't give up is part of it. I think that that there's I'm not sure. I think that's a hard
It's
question
a very
for
hard
me.
question.
I think that there's a lot of you have to listen to your body is one thing you have to do. If things don't feel right, you can't just let it sit and wait because you can go from being alive and healthy to in the hospital and dying very quickly with post transplant. You know, I take my medicine at about the same time every day. I don't, not 100%, but I communicate with the doctors, and if they recommend that I do something, I typically ask them why. What are the pluses and benefits, or benefits and negatives of doing. Why do they recommend take this medicine versus another medicine? The internet is there's a world of resources there. It's not all good. Most of it, there's a lot of good information though.
Yeah.
Find a support group too. There's 33, 34, almost 34 years out. I still love to participate in support groups. I think I'm an inspiration to a lot of new people who just found out they needed an organ transplant, or they've had one and they're struggling with things. Just to have the comfort of the experience of somebody who's been through it, and I know I can't give anybody any medical advice, and I would never try that unless I was a medical professional, which I'm not. But I think there's just a lot of people try to blame other people for things that happen to them, and that doesn't do a lot of good. And, having a positive attitude really, really, really helps. And there have been times when I felt like I've been lying to myself, when I kind of like, this isn't very good, and why me? But I think it's almost a waste of energy to go through those motions to do that, when you can concentrate and funnel your energy more on how do I get past this next issue. When I and for me, the shock of being told that I needed a transplant, and then the 8 weeks that from when I was told until I received the transplant, which is a very short time, and I realized that. I realized it was there's just a lot of different people go through so many different things, and I didn't have a long-term health issue prior to being told I needed the transplant, and I don't know another person who's had that experience. When I was fine, and I didn't have a heart attack. And with your medical team is important. Don't ignore things. Love your family. Look for the joy in life.
For sure. That's great advice.
If you don't feel like doing something, then don't. Take the day for yourself.
Yeah, I agree. Very good. Well, that's all great advice. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And you are truly an inspiration with your 30 plus years, almost 34 years of your heart transplants. I know that people are going to listen to this and think, wow, maybe I'll make it 34 years or more. So I hope that you feel like you're a great inspiration to people, because you are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you, Jenny. And good luck. Best of health.
You too. You too. And I'm sure we'll be talking again sometime soon. So,
take care. All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook. Oh, and if you have not signed up to be an organ donor, please visit www.organdonor.gov and register today. You too can save lives.